a crime was committed, a crime considered so serious that for its commission, the death penalty is mandatory and no statute of limitation applies. If the crime had been committed intentionally and was not the result of carelessness, then the circumstances warranted a finding of high treason with the mandatory death penalty. An exhaustive investigation may, even at this late date, uncover elements in or out of government who abetted the original act of treason. On March 21, 1980, FBI agents of the Pittsburgh field office interviewed, in his home, a former employee of the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation. More specifically, the unnamed interviewee worked at the company's facility in Apollo, Pennsylvania, a manufacturing plant for uranium fuel for nuclear reactors. Recalling one night working overtime in the spring of 1965, the interviewee related that when he entered the loading dock area on this particular evening, he noticed a flatbed truck backed up to the loading dock with some strange equipment on it. He advised he then noticed the NUMEC owner, Dr. Zalman Shapiro, pacing around the loading dock while shipping and receiving foreman and NUMEC truck driver were loading stove pipes that normally are used to store high-enriched uranium products, which he defined as 95% uranium. Bright polished aluminum canisters with yellow labels containing typewritten information and nuclear fan symbols. The interviewee, citing his natural curiosity, stated he observed another man lay his clipboard down on the empty drum located on the dock, whereupon he proceeded to read the information contained on the shipping order. He said he noticed that the destination for the equipment on the truck was Israel, and that it was to be transported by ship. After he had quickly read the information contained on the shipping order, the man grabbed the clipboard away from him, telling him in words to the effect that the material contained in the shipping order was confidential and not for his eyes. He advised that shortly thereafter, an armed guard ordered him off the loading dock. He advised he had not come forward before because he had a large family to support, and the day following the incident, the plant personnel manager of NUMEC threatened to fire him if he, quote, did not keep his mouth shut concerning what he had seen on the loading dock the night before. He further advised he mentioned the threat he received from the personnel manager to his union steward, whereupon he claims he was visited by, quote, some union goons, and again told to keep his mouth shut. Hi, my name is GDF, and you can probably tell by the direction that this video is going in that I'm not very advertiser-friendly. For that reason, I rely completely on my patrons, subscribers, and donations. Dr. Zalman Mordecai Shapiro, that man pacing around the loading dock, had at one time been a chemist with the Atomic Energy Commission, and in 1957 he became a founder of NUMEC. He was also the subject of 51 FBI reports, 41 of which were classified secret, and in November of 1968, the FBI began physical surveillance and wiretapping of Shapiro, stating, "We are investigating Shapiro to determine extent of his relations with Israeli government. As head of Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, Apollo, Pennsylvania, Shapiro has access to atomic energy material which could be most helpful to the Israelis." What worried the FBI were Shapiro's connections. Subject has been in contact on 2 occasions with Dr. Avraham Hermoni, scientific counselor, Israeli Embassy, Washington, D.C., and Israeli intelligence agent. Source has also disclosed contacts with a senior official of Israeli military intelligence, individuals associated with Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, and member of Israeli Internal Security Service. His loyalties as well were of concern. He is considering settling permanently in that country and, if necessary, would fight for Israel. FBI describes an awkward predicament. Subject and others involved in instant case, in addition to holding top positions in their respective fields, are very active and highly regarded in various Jewish organizations which exert some influence in this country, referring specifically to America's powerful Israel lobby. His affinity for Israel as well as his lobbying for the country were no secret, and he was quite open about it, stating in a 1984 oral history,
I am working for the ZOA, and I'm a national officer. I'm a vice president. I work for the Federation. I'm also an officer of the American Technion Society. I'm a director of Hillel. I work for the ADL, and I work for...
In other words, you work in every facet of the community?
Well,
Sounds like.
his Israel affinity would become a conflict of interest professionally, enough so that the FBI felt it appropriate to place him on their notorious security index. The index was a list of individuals to be placed under arrest without warrant in the event of, as FBI described, a national security emergency. The reason in Shapiro's case being that subject continues to solicit information for Israeli scientific censored personnel. Shapiro founded NUMEC in the late 1950s with close associate and owner of the Apollo Steel Company, David Lowenthal, who provided the seed capital. With it, they converted a portion of the steel mill into a uranium factory, pumping out up to 700 metric tons in a single year. But problems began in 1965. Write Howard Cohn and Barbara Newman for Rolling Stone, for its December 1st, 1977 edition, during a routine inventory, U.S. government inspectors discovered that a substantial amount of enriched uranium, enough for several atomic bombs, was missing from a Pennsylvania nuclear plant. Newman and Cohn write that the amount of material unaccounted for was 194 pounds, larger by far than any previous known discrepancy at other U.S. nuclear facilities, while also observing that approximately 22 pounds of enriched uranium are needed to make the smallest functional bomb. The numbers snowballed as there appeared to be a massive leak at the plant. As of October 31, 1965, there were an astounding 382 pounds unaccounted for. By early 1967, the Atomic Energy Commission had re-inventoried the plant and found an additional 190 pounds unaccounted for, or 572 pounds in all. According to the Rolling Stone sources, Israel continued to receive NUMEC uranium during the 1965-1966 period, despite increased U.S. scrutiny. Newman and Cohn further quote George Murphy, Jr., then executive director of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. The JCAE was the atomic energy regulator of the U.S. Congress. With regard to the Commission's estimate that 366 of the 572 pounds had been lost through normal plant operations, Murphy ridiculed the Atomic Energy Commission's conclusion that 127 pounds of liquid uranium had run off into the nearby Kiski River as a possibility that could be entertained only if the plant had run 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, since before the Revolutionary War. Suspicions arise when considering NUMEC's financials since, early on, this lost uranium was costing them millions in fines. In September 1966, the Atomic Energy Commission's press office revealed losses over many contracts have totaled approximately 178 kilograms of uranium-235, having a value of about $2 million. It seems curious the company could afford such an expense given NUMEC's financial data, provided by Roger J. Mattson, who led a 1977 investigation of the NUMEC affair for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Atomic Energy Commission's federal regulator. The $2.2 million in total charges was more than 4 times the Atomic Energy Commission's 1967 budget for research and development on nuclear material safeguards. The $2.2 million exceeded the initial capital used to form NUMEC. The $2.2 million was nearly 10 times the company's net income in its fiscal year ending September 30th, 1965. The $2.2 million was more than 50% of the company's long-term debt of $4.3 million at the end of its fiscal year, 1965. However, $2.2 million was a bargain for securing the material needed for a fledgling nation to build its first atom bombs. Indeed, John Haddon, CIA station chief in Tel Aviv from 1963 to 1967, throughout the NUMEC affair, would testify to Congress that NUMEC had been an Israeli operation from the beginning, but the CIA had not been able to follow the money trail. The agency thought NUMEC had been financed by the owner of Apollo Steel Mill, Israeli War of Independence veteran David Lowenthal. In fact, Mr. Lowenthal himself was also known to law enforcement. David L. Lowenthal, who is reportedly closely associated with high-ranking officials of the Israeli government, fought for Israel as a freedom fighter in 1956 and who currently travels to Israel on the average of approximately once each month. Information known to the Bureau previously, whose Pittsburgh field office noted the same, and additionally, that Lowenthal is closely associated with high-ranking officials of the Israeli government and recently observed shaking hands with Prime Minister Ben-Gurion and Defense Minister Moshe Dayan in Israel. In February 1976, Carl E. Duckett briefed a small group from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Duckett served as CIA Deputy Director for Science and Technology. He was also CIA's leading expert on Israel's nuclear weapons program. One of those commissioners present was Victor Galinsky. Writing years later, what Duckett confirmed, to everyone's astonishment, was that the CIA believed that the nuclear explosives in Israel's first several bombs, about 100 kilograms of bomb-grade uranium in all, came from material that was missing at a U.S. naval nuclear fuel plant operated by the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation in Apollo, Pennsylvania. The consequences are revealed by U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Werner Farr, writing in 1999 a history of the Israeli nuclear weapons program for the U.S. Air Force Counterproliferation Papers, a series prepared for policymakers. Farr writes, "Before the 1967 Six-Day War, they felt their nuclear facility threatened and reportedly assembled several nuclear devices. By the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel had a number of sophisticated nuclear bombs, deployed them, and considered using them. Additionally, Israel has most probably conducted several nuclear bomb tests." Israel's nuclear capability was known to CIA. A summary of the February 1976 Duckett briefing from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission notes that Duckett had related that CIA had drafted a national intelligence estimate on Israel's nuclear capability in 1968. He then showed it to CIA Director Richard Helms. Helms told him not to publish it, and he would take it up with President Johnson. Mr. Helms later related that he had spoken to the president, that the president was concerned, and that he had said, "Don't tell anyone else, even Dean Rusk and Robert McNamara." Indeed, President Lyndon Johnson found the information so sensitive that it be kept from Secretary of State Dean Rusk and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. The scale of Israel's nuclear arsenal by April of 1976 was reported in Time magazine. At a briefing for a group of American space experts in Washington recently, an official of the Central Intelligence Agency estimated that Israel had between 10 and 20 nuclear weapons available for use. The CIA official was none other than Carl Duckett himself, who let the information slip to members of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. In fact, Time has learned, Israel possesses a nuclear arsenal of 13 atomic bombs, assembled, stored, and ready to be dropped on enemy forces from specially equipped Kafir and Phantom fighters or Jericho missiles. These weapons have a 20-kiloton yield, roughly as powerful as those that obliterated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Describing how close the world came to nuclear war, Time reports that after midnight on the morning of October 9th, during the Yom Kippur War, Defense Minister Moshe Dayan solemnly warned Premier Golda Meir, "This is the end of the Third Temple." Mrs. Meir thereupon gave Dayan permission to activate Israel's Doomsday weapons. As each bomb was assembled, it was rushed off to waiting Air Force units. Before any triggers were set, however, the battle on both fronts turned in Israel's favor. The 13 bombs were sent to desert arsenals where they remain today, still ready for use. As reported in the Christian Science Monitor, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger even received a message from Brezhnev stating that Moscow was contemplating unilateral military steps in the Middle East. And late at night on October 24, 1973, American troops all over the world were put on alert. DEFCON 3, the highest state of armed forces readiness for peacetime conditions. The year before, the CIA judged the veracity of the NUMEC story in a memo titled Possible Diversion of Weapons-Grade Nuclear Materials to Israel by Officials of the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation. As CIA put it, diversion of special nuclear materials to Israel by Dr. Shapiro and his associates is a distinct possibility. Lead-coated or nickel-plated, it would present no radiation hazard and could have easily gone by diplomatic pouch or Israel merchant ship or even El Al Airlines. Transportation of diverted material to Israel would have been a simple matter. Indeed, in a top-secret strategy document from July 1969 from Henry Kissinger to President Nixon, there is circumstantial evidence that some fissionable material available for Israel's weapons development was illegally obtained from the United States by about 1965. This is one program on which the Israelis have persistently deceived us and may even have stolen from us. This allegation was echoed in an embarrassing leak of the CIA's Special National Intelligence Estimate for 1974, which was released in almost unredacted form in 1978. We believe that Israel has already produced nuclear weapons. Israel has gone to great effort to obtain uranium concentrate. It has sought this material clandestinely, followed by a redaction. Another CIA source from April of 1977 adds further doubt to the Atomic Energy Commission's official story. A note from Anthony A. Lapham, the CIA's General Counsel to CIA Associate Deputy Director for Operations Theodore Shackley, reads, "As I understand it, the investigations of NUMEC are related to the possibility that nuclear material may have been diverted, and apparently at least the Energy Research and Development Administration has concluded there is no evidence of diversion. However, that conclusion is difficult to square with our intelligence information." An amusing example from the same year, a CIA memorandum for the record containing a summary of Carl Duckett's testimony to congressional staffers. When asked how stolen uranium could conceivably be transported out of the United States, Duckett responded he had no first-hand knowledge of the topic, followed by redactions of the remainder of his 3-page-long response. Investigations of Dr. Zalman Mordecai Shapiro focused attention on his ties to Israeli intelligence from the beginning, as we've seen. In October 1968, FBI Pittsburgh reports a request from a group of Israelis to visit the NUMEC plant at Apollo. One of them was Dr. Avraham Hermoni, a member of the Israeli intelligence service, who was known to be engaged in the establishment of a technical intelligence network in the United States, and that prior to his assignment as scientific counselor of the Israeli Embassy, Washington, D.C., he was intimately connected with Israeli efforts to develop nuclear weapons in his capacity as Technical Director, Armament Development Authority, Ministry of Defense. Another visitor was the notorious Rafi Eitan, later spy handler of Jonathan Pollard. Interestingly enough, the NUMEC affair is apparently not taboo in the Israeli press. Indeed, when in 2015 the Jerusalem Post published an article on the life of now 88-year-old Eitan, they included in his career summary involvement in the diversion of highly enriched uranium from an American nuclear fuel plant, the Apollo affair. A 1978 report from the General Accounting Office concluded that federal agencies failed to investigate the NUMEC affair. We believe a timely, concerted effort on the part of these 3 agencies would have greatly aided and possibly solved the NUMEC diversion questions if they desired to do so. Difficulties in properly investigating the affair include a lack of transparency, troves of documents unreleased or released with extraordinary redactions. The CIA's caginess is exhibited in a secret 1979 memo from then Acting Deputy Director for Operations John Stein, ordering to advise the General Accounting Office that we cannot declassify our report because of the need to have a coordinated executive branch position and our desire to protect a sensitive and valuable liaison equity. In their seminal work, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, John Mersheimer and Stephen Walt observe that the irony is hard to miss. The United States has pressured many other states to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, imposed sanctions on countries that have defied U.S. wishes and acquired nuclear weapons anyway, gone to war in 2003 to prevent Iraq from pursuing weapons of mass destruction, and contemplated attacking Iran and North Korea for the same reason. Yet Washington has long subsidized an ally whose clandestine weapons of mass destruction activities are well known, and whose nuclear arsenal has given several of its neighbors a powerful incentive to seek weapons of mass destruction themselves. It's difficult, or virtually impossible, for us to even know what the Israeli nuclear arsenal has become. Just days after the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, we'll remember that an Israeli lawmaker of the ruling Likud party called for use of a Jericho missile, strategic alert, before considering the introduction of forces, Doomsday weapon. This is my opinion. May God preserve all our strength. And Amichai Eliyahu, Israel's Minister of Heritage, who also suggested dropping a nuclear bomb on the Gaza Strip. Haaretz intelligence correspondent Yossi Melman dismisses these officials as messianic and far-right. Though, is this observation enough to quell the anxieties of those fearing nuclear holocaust in the Middle East? After all, messianic and far-right officials lead powerful ministries in the current government of Israel, including religious Zionist Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister and leader of the Jewish Power Party, the same party as Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu. The sustained and continuous rise in political power of the Messianic right in Israel is well documented. Perhaps most terrifyingly of all, the sheer power of such mystery weapons can only be speculated, though there are some troubling hints in the history. If we remember the history of the Israeli nuclear weapons program for the U.S. Air Force Counterproliferation Papers, U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Werner Farr noted that considerable collaboration between Israel and South Africa developed and continued through the 1970s and 1980s. South Africa became Israel's primary supplier of uranium. In a disturbing development, in 1987, the Institute for Defense Analysis prepared a report for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, which declared that the Israelis are developing the kind of codes which will enable them to make hydrogen bombs. All the more troubling when considering the fact that, according to former Nuclear Regulatory Commissioner Victor Galinsky, on September 22, 1979, a U.S. Vela satellite designed to detect nuclear tests registered a signal over the Indian Ocean that was generally believed in the U.S. intelligence community to indicate an Israeli nuclear test carried out with South African cooperation. And the government covered it up. This conclusion was politically awkward for the Carter administration, then trying to mediate Mideast peace. The president's science advisor brought together a group of prominent non-governmental scientists for a narrow review of the event. The panel came up with the inventive interpretation that the light signal detected by the satellite came not from the ocean surface far away, but rather from reflections from tiny particles that happened to pass in front of the satellite detector in exactly the right way to imitate a bomb signal. The White House panel discounted data from ionospheric disturbances recorded by a radio telescope in Puerto Rico that was consistent with the bomb interpretation of the satellite data. Additionally, the Vela satellite experts at the Los Alamos laboratory are still convinced their satellite recorded a nuclear test. The worrisome part? The technical significance of such a test was that it would have indicated Israel was developing hydrogen weapons, for which testing is essential, and thus its weapons program was then already highly advanced.